Coming up on the show this week, we've got some really cool new XC bikes on the scene, a load of details about the new Rockshox Lyric, some great bike cave entries for you guys, and a really cool story about the new prototype GT downhill bike and where it came from. So first up, let's jump into news because there's a whole bunch of stuff that's just been popping up on the screens this week. So first up is the brand new Rockshox Lyric RC2. So you might have seen some pictures of this already. It comes in racing red. Of course, everyone knows that's the fastest colour. It's the colour that Rockshox launched the Boxer in, and now this is their flagship enduro fork. So the first major thing that's different about the new RC2 is the damper unit inside it. It's got separate high-speed and low-speed compression on a double adjustable dial. And this thing is supposed to be amazing. And then internally the air spring has changed as well. It's got the same debonair system that we saw on Nino Schurter's World Cup bike recently in Stellenbosch. So that new debonair spring is a lot more supple, and it's supposed to be more supple under extreme action. So think coming into sort of a hard braking bump sort of turn, something like that. It's supposed to be really supple and really track the ground. The rebound damping has also been refined on there, and interestingly you can now pick different offsets. So that is offset of the crown which can tailor the way the bike feels. So in 27.5 inch it's available in 37mm and 46mm, and in the 29 it's 42 and 51, and of course comes in that racing red finish. Pricing is $999, that's roughly €1,100 and £989 sterling, and they're available right now. And whilst Rockshox were busy getting that Lyric ready, they've wheeled out the same treatment on the Pike. So all the bells and whistles that you have on the Lyric on the slightly smaller fork. And they've also done some improvements on the Yari and the Revelation. If you're not in the market to upgrade your fork, you can take advantage of that new debonair system that's available on the new forks by upgrading the damper unit and the air spring unit in your existing fork. So all of these are sort of reverse upgradable. So the debonair kit retails for $42, that's €47 or £42 sterling. Again, that will fit in Pikes, Revelations, Yaris, and of course in the Lyric. And then damper kits retail at various pricing depending on what fork it's in. Really cool that you can actually upgrade that stuff so your existing fork will feel just like the brand new ones just launched. And one final thing from Rockshox, their Deluxe and Super Deluxe shocks have also had a bit of a nip and tuck. So they both feature the debonair spring on those, again for even more sensitivity than they already have. They've also got refined rebound damping, and the coil models come in RCT, and there's also the RT, which is the remote version, which you're going to start seeing on a lot of the Enduro World Series racers bikes. Next, coming from Santa Cruz, is the brand new version of the Blur, which is one of their original bikes. So it's a 100mm travel cross-country platform using that virtual pivot point. Now this thing is super light now. It's available in the C, which is their cheaper carbon, and the CC, which is their high-end carbon. It's got a 69-degree head angle, 100mm travel front and rear. It's 1x specific now, and it's got dual remote lockouts available for it. The bike caters for internal routed dropper posts, and it weighs just 2,060 grams for a size medium frame and shock. Shipping as we speak, and it's available in small, medium, large, extra large, has a lifetime frame warranty and, interestingly, a lifetime bearing warranty on there. The frame is available with a float factory shock on it for just under $3,000 and complete bikes for just under $3,700. And another launch from Santa Cruz, this time it's their refined highball hardtail frame. So that is their cross-country racers 29-inch frame. So this thing is 29 exclusive, it's not compatible with 27.5-inch wheels. It's half a pound lighter than the previous model, which is an extraordinary amount for a cross-country frame that's that light anyway. So it's got 69.5-degree head angle on there for really whippy control on that. It's available in CC and the CC levels of carbon fibre. It's got internal dropper post routing, boost axle spacing, 1x specific on there, so you want to maximise on that sort of thing. Small to XL sizing, and it's available as a frame set in the better carbon in the CC for $1,899, and the builds are available from $2,799. Now that is actually one of the cleanest looking XC hardtails I think I've seen yet. And bear in mind, I got to see a lot of those when we were out in Stellenbosch recently. Interestingly, being a hardtail frame, it's got a 27.2 seat post on it, or a 27.2 seat tube on it. And the reason for that, of course, is to enable a slight amount of flex. So despite the fact the frame is incredibly stiff for power transmission and just to be a good performing frame, it has to have an element of flex in it to be like a good cross-country bike. Otherwise it's just going to be too harsh to ride. So it's really good to see that Santa Cruz have approached that like a real proper racer's bike. I would love to have a go on one of those highballs. I reckon that is a rocket ship. In last week's show, we showed off that Canadian brand Da Vinci had their new 29-inch wheel downhill bike. Of course, at this stage, it is just a prototype, but it's likely to see production at some point. And now they've done it again, and they've shown off their new enduro platform. Again, this time with 29-inch wheels, and it looks very much like their existing 27.5-inch wheel bike called the Spartan, which has got 165mm of travel. So it's a good chance it's going to be a very similarly spec'd bike. Now, Keegan Wright recently won the giant enduro race out of Crankworks in Rotorua on that bike. It's just on the screen now. Have a look at that thing. I think you're going to see more and more 29-inch enduro bikes happening this year. Now, also spotted out in Crankworks in Rotorua was this brand new looking Banshee Legend, but unlike the normal Banshee Legend, of course, it's a downhill bike. This one doesn't have 27.5-inch wheels. This is a 29er. So it's yet another company jumping on that 29-inch bandwagon, except Banshee, as always, have done things a little bit different. So whereas our previous bike had 205mm travel in the 27.5-inch wheel, this one only has 190mm front and rear. And it does sound like they're pitching this towards the taller rider, so certainly someone above 6 foot tall, which obviously makes a lot of sense from my point of view, being a taller rider. Now, something else that's really interesting about this is it's got less anti-squat built into the suspension platform, as the designer Keith anticipates that the riders are going to be using a smaller chainring to compensate for the size of those wheels. So it does sound like he's really done a bit of good homework on that, and I look forward to having some more information on that bike soon. Looks like the Canadians have been super busy because there's a brand new Rocky Mountain hardtail called the Vertex, and that's a full-on XC race bike. Now, this bike is available in aluminium options and also carbon, as you can see on the screen right now, which they're made from their Smoothwall HBO carbon. The frame set weighs 2.68 pounds, that's 1.22 kilos, in a size medium, so not a lot by all accounts. It's 29-inch and 27.5-inch plus size compatible with a maximum of 2.8-inch tyres. Interestingly, and also very similar to the Santa Cruz Highball, is the inclusion of the 27.2 seat post. Now, it does have routing for an internal dropper post there, and of course there's not that many that exist in 27.2, which might be the concern of some of you. But the reason they've included it, the same for Santa Cruz, of course, is for comfort, because the bigger the seat tube you go for on a hardtail that's going to be this stiff, the less amount of comfort you're going to get. It needs to have some sort of bump absorption, otherwise it's just going to be a really rickety, harsh ride. And of course, the guys at Rocky Mountain really know what they're doing with this, because they've been building bikes to cope with North Shore riding and all the surrounding hills for a very long time. Now, the bike's available in 3 amazing colourways. There's Flaming Lips, Back in Black and White Snake. Available in sizes small through to extra large. Complete builds are available from $2,899 US, and the carbon frame set is available from $1,599 US. Okay, so last week's show had some pretty interesting comments about the Strava stuff that I asked you guys about. Can't go into all of those, but I am intending on getting back to a lot of you, because there's some really good comments in there. But a few of them I am going to read out. So one from Israel Zentino says, I love using Strava, and not for competition purposes. It's purely to keep a record of how I'm improving. It's also great to keep record of my bike and components, specifically tyres and a chain, so it's good to know how long they last and what works better for me. I never ride to get personal records or try and beat King of the Hill. I'm neither that good or fit for it, but it does motivate me when I shorten times out on the trail. It's also great for exploring new trails. Yeah, they are all really good points. I especially like the thing about keeping an eye on your bike's wear and tear. That's a really good point, and almost enough to make me consider using it. I used to use a bit of software called Endomondo, which is something vaguely similar, but it's more about mapping a route than it was sort of figuring out how fast you are against other riders. Newt Teller says, real racers know that racing a real race is where you prove your prowess. So Strava times are bunk, especially now that e-bikers are deliberately messing with the segments, which I find hilarious. Don't really know what to say to that. I hadn't really thought about e-bikers going out there doing it, but I'm going to have to ask the guys over on GMBN and come back to this one. Let's pick this up with Dan Deers. I don't think Strava leads to unsocial riding. I actually think it creates some cheeky competitiveness amongst friends. Just because you're always trying to beat each other's times and have bragging rights on who's the quickest between your mates. And it's a good app to improve your skills. Yeah, do you know what? I completely agree with all of you guys. I just said the way I don't like to have this sort of stuff interfere with my riding, but I do actually see some real sort of positives to using Strava, and I might consider using it myself. But thanks for setting us straight on that. Next one is from Biker Jew. Dolly, which helmet do you use? They mentioned in the last Dirt Share show that your head is large and long, which is what I need. Yeah, a lot of my friends call me horsehead because I've got quite a squashed head that's quite big this way. I use a size medium POC helmet. I used to like the Trebek, but the Tech Tail is the one I really like. Fits very similar to the Troy A1. So both of those helmets I would take a medium large in, and they both fit me incredibly well. Sit nice and deep on my head, which is obviously quite tall. And very comfortable, basically very similar fitting helmets. I do tend to struggle with that because helmets can sit quite high or pinch on the front of my head, so it can be difficult. You know, the Giro helmets tend to be a bit rounder on my head, so head rattles around in them, you know, as much as I really like them. But yeah, the POC, that's where I'm at. Okay, now it's time for Bike Cave. This is where I get to see all the places that you guys work on your bikes. Please continue to send your Bike Cave entries in and use the hashtag when you send them in, hashtag Bike Cave. Let us know in the comments below where we can find those. Alternatively, email to the email address that's on the screen right now. And you can also send them to us via Facebook as well. I'm going to jump straight in with a bunch of great ones I've picked out from this week. So first is from Doug LeMay, who's in Burlington in Vermont. Now he's got a really trick workshop. Although I do notice that your pegboard looks pretty bald on the back there. There's not much going on. However, you've got a good selection of stickers on the toolboxes. I love the rubber matting as well you've got on the floor in there. Got some decent bikes hanging up in there. I'm not too sure about the fat bike, it's kind of Neil's territory. But looking at the neck braces hanging on the wall there, I think you're probably fairly serious about your gravity riding. Am I right? Nice transition in there too. Decent work stand too. Got a compressor down the back there. Decent roll cab. Plenty of body armour hanging up in there. Like it. Nice setup. And I like your bike mount hooks are on the wall as well. I'm in the market for some of those at the moment actually. Also, it's got a punch bag. That's quite a good idea to have in a bike cave for a bit of extra training. Well into that. Okay, next up is from Christian Smith. Thanks for a good program. Well, thank you for watching. I appreciate that. Here's my bike cave. I built it last year for mostly mountain bikes, and I love working on bikes. I'm a former bicycle mechanic. Hope my cave makes it onto the show. Christian from Denmark. Well, let's have a look. Oh, nice. Oh, I like the way you've painted the OSB you've got on the ceiling there, so it's nice and bright and white in there. Looks good. Got the tools at a 90-degree angle. Oh, actually, no, you've got a pair of mole grips. Doesn't fit the 90-degree angle. Martin will not be pleased at that. I'm actually going to have to show him that. However, you've got most things going. You've got plenty of outer cabling. You've got your little parts boxes. See a few mud guards up there hanging away. Crowbar right at the top. To be honest, I'd probably keep the crowbar nearer the door if I was you. I think they're a bit of a sort of a burglar persuader if you ever need to fend one off. Nice vice on there as well. Nice. Oh, you've got Merida. Quite like Meridas. Is that a road bike or is that a gravel? That's a road bike. Liking that. Interesting. Retro Peugeot there as well with the sort of lock built onto it. Looks like you've got dynamo on there too. Is that a pub bike or maybe a commuter? Not really sure. Like it. Good work. Next up is from Joe Herman. This is where I work on most of my bikes. I live with my parents, I have to work with a little space that I get. I've got a toolbox for my birthday and a couple of special bike tools. With this basic setup, I'm able to do almost everything that needs to be done to a bike. Hope you guys like it. Let's have a look. Little setup. Dude, that's like, you've got loads of room in there. Fair enough, there's like a couple of lawnmowers in the way, but you could move them out of the way. Liking your bike hanging device with your Yeti hanging down from that. Man, living with parents must be alright if you can afford a Yeti. That's for sure. That's a deluxe bike. Nice jump bike there. I like the fact that your cycle helmet is a pride of the shelf next to cat litter. That's interesting. Loads of tools though, which is always good. I like the fact you've got these in their own little cases. So it does prove a point you don't need a specific place because you can just take them and work on a bike wherever. Maybe if you want to work in the garden or something. Loads of bikes. Looks like your whole family are into cycling. That's always good to see. And it looks like you've been doing some one-by conversion, judging by the fact that you've got a chain set there, missing a mech and a shifter just sat next to it. Nice. Nice work, Joe. Yeah, definitely like it. Okay, and the last one is from Richard Way. Hi guys, here's my bike cave. It's actually the living room of the house. Always the best place to work on a bike, I find. I've got to pack all the bikes and tools away when we have guests over. Also, I've got a go box with all my gear I need for rides, so I can just make one trip to the car. Plus, I made a cleaning stand out the side of the fence so I can hang my bike off. I love the fact that you completely have a work stand, you've got everything set up on the carpet in your front room. Wheels just leaning up against the sofa. Nice front room as well, by the way. And I like the fact that it looks like some sort of utility area. You just sort of stash all the bikes in when you're obviously not working on them. Go box is a good idea. I've got something similar in the back of my car. Bit bigger than that, but same idea. I could put a helmet in, change of clothes, all that sort of stuff. Trunk bag, I guess you'd call it, something like that. But yeah, smart way of doing things. And I love that he's done that little fence idea. I'm going to rip off that exact idea. That's a great idea for washing bikes outside. You see those sort of setups quite often at trailheads where they have a few Allen keys on the cables. And in fact, Park makes them similar to that for exactly that purpose. But I love yours. Yours is more organic. Well into that. Thank you very much, guys, for sending those bike cave entries in. Like I said, make sure you fire them in and we'll check them out on next week's show. Okay, now it's time for Rewind. That's the retro section of the show where you guys hopefully be sending in some sort of images of bikes or any old mountain bike kit you've got. Don't forget you can send them in, send them to the email address on the screen, use that hashtag Rewind. And of course, if there's anything particular you want to know about, you want to talk about, let us know in the comments below and we'll get a discussion going. Of course, if it's anything we might be able to find some archive images of, then we're more than happy to try and do a bit of research to find out about this stuff and tell you guys all about it. In the meantime, I'm going to kick you off with Jonathan Clapp, who sent in some retro Konas. Hi guys, I thought it was about time I sent him some pictures of my retro stable. So there's a 1999 Fire Mountain, a 14-inch, which is his daughter's. Oh man, you know, I always remember how aggressive they looked when they first came out because they had such an aggressive sloping top tube on them. And then they had that Project 2 fork on the front as well, and they look really, really cool, I think. I love the fact you've got the tan wall tyres on there and you've got those Mavic rims. I think, hey, you've listed them here. So Mavic X517 Citron. So a really bizarre colour, sort of nearly a green actually, rather than just the yellow there. And of course you mentioned you've got the Shimano DX brakes. So they were the red V brakes. They're actually exactly the same as the LX ones that are available at the time, except the red DX range was specifically for BMXs. It was the race colour to match the DX SPD pedals and the black and red brake levers, or brake lever, should I say, in the BMX way. Super nice to see that. I love it. And of course you've got modern tyres on there, so Halo twin rails, but of course you put them on there to make them nice and fast because they're like a semi-slick, and of course a tan wall, so they're quite period of that bike. Nice. And of course your entry to full suspension, your 2003 Kahuna. Yeah, that's cool, like a great bike, sort of faux bar setup. Oh man, you've got an X-Lite Fly stem on there, that's pretty rad. Don't see many of those now. And the click-on seat post and the Pro Carbon bars, wow. Actually, I'll take it back, you've actually got some really, really cool stuff on there. But for me, it's about that Caldera and probably that Fire Mountain. Lovely bikes for the time, really were. Cool, so thanks for sending that in. Next up is from Gary Locum. Thought the fans might like to see my original Turner 5 spot, which I had built in 05 in the UK. It now lives with me in Melbourne. It was the last of the Horstlink models for the 5 spot. That's right, of course, yeah. So I had a following model from this. In fact, must have been a few years later, because after the Horstlink ones came ones that were, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they had the seat stay link, so single pivot linkage activated, and then following that they went to DW link. So I had a DW link version, which was a couple of years later, I believe. But the Horstlink is what Turner were famous for. Of course, it was like the FSR licensed link in those days. The keen Turner lover might notice that the rear end had 5.5 inches of travel due to me breaking the original back end and getting a new one through warranty, which had the extra travel. That's a nice touch, being able to get that. No bearings in sight in the rear suspension, all shim based, which you can grease using a grease gun. Yeah, they were famous for doing that, for having the bushings in there, which worked really well, except when they started getting dried out, and I found that they could squeak a little bit. But like I said, I've got the grease gun pivots on there, so you could keep them in good working order. Man, they're really nice still, even looking at that. Well, it does look funny seeing a bike with a frame that large now with 26-inch wheels. It does make you realise that 27.5 is actually a better fit for most purposes. But yeah, really nice to see that. Love the Hope brake levers on there, although you've got modern grips. Got the retro Eastern bar and stem. Plenty of great kit on there. Wicked, thank you for sending that one in, Gary. Okay, now it is time for top mods. This is where you guys send in all the sort of stuff that you've been hopping up on your bikes, whether it's grips, new front tyre, a new fork, suspension tuning, whatever it is, send it in. Don't forget to use that hashtag top mods. I want to see what you guys have been spending and what you've been putting on your bikes to make it better for the way you like to ride. So first up this time is from Luke Beggar. Hi guys, I built this bike myself in early March. I managed to grab myself a sponsor. I'm 14 years old, I'm really proud of this. Yeah, damn right, you should be proud of that, good work. And that's a hell of a bike, by the way. So Santa Cruz Nomad CC, so that's the more expensive of the two. They do the C and the CC. 2017 model. Wow, Hope brakes, Hope rotors, Hope enduro rims on there, Hope cranks, Hope stems. Obviously Hope are sorting you out a bit there. Renthal fat bar carbon light bars. SRAM GX Eagle cassette shifter mech, XX1 chain in black just to match him with a frame there, reverb, 125mm drop post, and 2018 Fox 36 factory forks. Blake will be jealous of those forks, he loves the orange ones. Oh man, I'll tell you what, that's a super nice. If you sent that into Bike Vault, that would get a super nice, I reckon. I like your shot there with the no parking as well. Nice, very good, good work Luke. Okay, next up is from Andy Baker. So Andy's got a giant trance. It made the following mods while sticking to a low budget and keeping a red and black theme. That's what I like to see. So you've got black and red DMR V8 pedals on there. Got a KS E10 dropper post, race face Atlas bar and grips. A chunked stem. I don't know chunked. Just trying to see this. Yeah, cool though. Looks nice. I'm loving those DMR pedals on there you've got with a little paint flick on them. Red and black water bottle, nice, black bottle cage, various stuff on there, handy for South Wales. Man, you've gone to a lot of effort. I like the graphics you've done on the fork and shock as well. Are they stock or no? They're decals. Yeah, they look trick as. Nice. Next up is from Matthew W. In 2015, I got back into mountain biking. I started with a Trek 820, not shown. Okay, that's why I can't see it. Progressed onto a 2017 GT Aggressor, which I used to help me learn to work on my own bike. In 2017 I outgrew it and progressed to a 2018 Roscoe, so that's a Trek Roscoe 8. Who knows what next year will bring, but until then here's the list of the mods I made to both. So the Trek, he's put Shimano M6000 brakes on it, RT66 rotors, Extra Star pedals, stands no tubes wheels with 38mm rims, Fox 34 Float Performance e-bike fork on there. That's an unusual upgrade. Does that mean you're intending on putting that on an e-bike later, or you just prefer the fact it's quite heavy duty crown and sort of build to it? Quite interesting, let us know. Frame protection, all mountain style kit. They're really good actually, especially that top tube one for stopping your paint from dulling down from knee pads or your knees rubbing on that top tube. Looking good. I'm really loving that Roscoe, by the way. The colours of that looks really, really trick. Always been a bit of a Trek fan, I've got to say. Nice lines on it. That seat tube, sorry, the top tube all the way into seat stays. That looks really sweet. Now I noticed you're waiting for some thinner tyres as well, so you've even got mods in the post. That's pretty good going. Nice couple of bikes there, well into that. Thank you for sending those in, Matt. Like I say, please continue to send in your top mods. Really want to see what you guys have been doing. If you've got any videos of yourselves putting that stuff on your bike, that'd be great. Or maybe you want to introduce yourselves. Hi guys, this is my top mods on my bike. Happily put that stuff on the show. So fire them in and we'll see you next week. Now it's time for Tech of the Week. And this week I want to do things a little bit differently because I've been seeing some prototype shots of a new GT downhill bike out there, and whilst I've asked GT to comment on this bike, they won't give me much. So I'm going to take you back and show you a bit of a history about where GT have come from, and we can form some sort of speculations on what this bike is going to be and what it's going to do. So just the first one though is they've also got an enduro platform out there, as you can see by the shots on screen. And what you might notice compared to what GT have done in the last few years is there's no, or appears to be no iDrive system on there. It looks like a standard 4-bar linkage. So that's quite an interesting move from GT because that's kind of where they started way back with the LTS, which we'll get to in a minute. And of course there's the new, I'm going to call it the Fury because their current downhill bike is called the Fury, so let's just assume it may follow suit. And that is it on the screen right now, and we're going to check that out with a few really cool details in a minute. But let's go all the way back to the early 90s in fact. So 1993 is really where GT were put on the map as far as this world of suspension goes, and I had one of the first mountain bike suspension bikes on the market, certainly one of the more advanced ones. It was called the RTS. So this is it on the screen now, and you'll see it's got a high pivot up there, and you see the shock is tucked down by the down tube, and it's got a rocker down by the bottom bracket. So the RTS stands for rocker tuned suspension. So that was a high pivot design, and it had a lot of anti-dive and anti-squat built into it. So basically, the harder you pedaled, it would resist the chainstay growth that you tend to get with high pivot designs and would kind of lock out that rear suspension. But using the rear brake would actually soften it slightly. Not sure what the thinking was behind that, but it was a really popular bike at the time because of the fact that people's first sort of allergy, if you like, to suspension was by pedaling it, you're going to be springing up and down all day long. And that really resisted it and actually opened everyone's mind to the fact that you could have a suspension mountain bike and it would perform really well for cross country and downhill use. So although travel was minimal, it was a really popular bike. So in about 1994, we started seeing early versions of the LTS, so it was linkage tuned suspension. And that is a little bit more similar to what we're starting to see now again from GT. So it's a 4-bar link, it's got a low pivot, it's got the Horst link on the chainstay, and it's got a shock base up the top on the linkage. The early linkages were made of investment cast titanium, and they uses bushes throughout. Now that huge bush that drove that link up the top, when that got dry, I specifically remember they used to squeak a little bit, so I had quite a few friends who used to have that bike. Now the shock itself was mounted, it was trunnion mounted, so you could change the height of the shock and basically you could drop the bottom bracket or raise the bottom bracket. So it was quite an advanced design for the time, and it was incredibly active as well, under both braking and sort of just acceleration forces. And I remember watching friends' bikes, you could see that back end tracking the ground like nothing else at the time. It worked so well. Later came the LTS Downhill, which was made famous by Nicolas Vulio, who in 1995 at Cap d'Aille won basically by 14 seconds on that bike, which basically stamped it on the ground. But the thing that was really special about his particular bike, look how slack that head angle is. So that was 65 degrees, and back in those days that was unheard of. People were running like nearly 70 degree head angles basically, and he was running 65. That man was so ahead of his time. Then later on came the STS models of both the LTS and the LTS Downhill. So you had the STS and the STS Downhill, and they were the thermoplastic models. So using a sort of carbon technology starting to come into bikes, and they looked pretty incredible. And they were ridden by Mike King, Steve Peat, and some other huge names. Following on from that came the Lobo, which also used STS technology, and again that was another 4-bar style linkage, except it used the pull shock design, and the shock was housed behind the seat tube, so it had a bit of an odd look to it. And although the bike has that strange look to it, it was quite popular at the time, despite the fact that they did have some niggles here and there, although it's still somehow kind of quite a desirable bike. And then of course in 1998 came the iDrive. Now this was quite a revolutionary bike for the time, because you got to think people were trying to combat chain forces and come up with the best sort of design for an active suspension design. And what GT came out with was this iDrive concentric pivot style system. So it was effectively a high pivot suspension design, which of course in a high pivot you can get a lot of chain growth which affects stuff, but using a concentric cam system, the drivetrain effectively floated while the rear end was unable to do its thing. It was a very complicated design on these early ones, but it worked really well. Now this carried through their range for quite some time, and they were originally released in 1999, but the design kept all the way through until about 2006. 2007 in fact, they're still using the iDrive design on the DHI, and it had a really strange look, something I'd say between a speeder bike from Star Wars and a motocross frame. So it had strange fairing on there and a sort of a seat mast tower. The bike was white. They did a blue team race version, but the white one was a really strange looking bike for the time. Incredibly light. I seem to remember it being about 40 pounds for a complete bike, which even by today's standards is incredibly light for a downhill bike. Now over the years, GT were famous for coming out with loads of strange concept bikes. And one of the concept bikes that saw production was the G-Box. So it was based on, I think it was a Shimano Nexus hub or maybe an Alpine hub in the middle of the frame with a twin chainring sort of drive system. So it's basically one of the first production gearbox bikes. And although they said it was a downhill bike, it had a very steep head angle and very odd geometry. The chain stays on a bike were nearly 18 inches long, which with a 26-inch wheel back then made it almost impossible to manual. This thing was a very odd bike. But needless to say, they were sort of trying new things, and they further developed this into downhill prototypes as well. And then following on from that is the more recent GT Fury system, which we've seen various top level riders race. Mark Beaumont, who used to work for GMBN, he was one of the first racers to take a World Cup, again basically on one of GT's new platforms. It was a refined suspension design, still using the basis of that iDrive system. And of course, as you can see on screen right now, is what we're going to just call the GT Fury 2019 for the time being. There probably will be a different name for this thing, and we might not see it in 2019, but typically GT have been famous for showing off a bike the year before we see it, and they sort of tend to launch their bikes in autumn. So perhaps we'll see something in Eurobike or maybe one of the other shows later in the year. So there are no official sort of statements on this bike yet, but we do know a bunch of the statistics of it. So it's got approximately 200 millimeters of travel, and it's got carbon front end on there and an alloy rear end. Now GT of course are one of the first companies to bring carbon into the mountain bike world with those early STS bikes. Now it loses the iDrive design, but it does make a return of course, this classic 4-bar system. So if you look on the chainstay, it's got the horse link on there, and then it's got a rocker up the top, and you'll notice it's got quite a high pivot, and it's got a chain running over that pivot. Now the reason for that is a high pivot is great placement for bump absorption. It's got a slightly rearward axle path, which also means as a part of that design you're going to get a lot of chain growth. So by running the chain over the pivot, it simulates what the chain would be doing a low pivot design, so it minimises that chain growth. So in theory, this should be a really significantly good bike for GT, and it's very simplified as well. And as I showed you earlier, the enduro bike, which you can see on screen now, it's got a very similar system, although I can't quite see if it's got that high pivot or not from that shot. But we may well see the design being carried across, although we do tend to think that a high pivot design does work better in a downhill environment because it's really good for those big impacts. Now if you have a look at a couple of details, look at the way the shock is mounted. So that's a trunnion mount. That is kind of reminiscent of the old LTS. But what you might notice at the bottom mount of the shock is there's a flip chip there. So that could be a geometry change thing, but I suspect, knowing what GT are like, that is to allow it to run both 29 and 27.5 inch wheels, because I'm pretty sure there's no way that GT would release a new bike without that sort of compatibility option built into it. So hopefully we're going to see a 29er version of this bike, or it being ran as a 29er quite soon. So it kind of feels like GT have almost gone a bit full circle with this bike and made a bit of a return to simplicity. But if you look at what most other big downhill bikes are doing, it's actually quite reminiscent of a lot of them. Now another thing, looking at the images here, again its images is kind of hard to tell from this. It looks like there may be the provision to have a longer chainstay setting on there. I can't see another hole, but where the rear mech mount is suspended from the frame, it looks like there's room to grow that. So that would also reflect the ability to run a bigger wheel in there. So perhaps this could be a modular bike. We'll have to wait and see. But like I said, we're going to run this as a GT Fury 2019 and see what GT say about that in the coming months. But hopefully you're going to see a lot more cool and exciting bikes coming out. And I really want to start looking into sort of history of bike brands. So if there's any out there you'd like us to have a look at, like we've just done with the GT range, let us know. Okay, just a quick update on bike build before we go. I'm just waiting for a couple of bits to turn up. I was hoping they would have turned up before this show, but they haven't. So touch wood, I will have a headset and some frame protection stuff to get on the bike for the next show. In the meantime, if you want to see an Emily Batty Pro bike, click right down here. And for a bit more of a techie video, if you want to find out where it's safe to use a torque wrench on your bike and where you should be using one, click up here. As always, click on that globe to subscribe. And if you like the video, give us a thumbs up.